Welcome to 5 Things I Learned About the NBA this week. My name's James. I like history and basketball, and these are the 5 things I've learned this week. So the first one is about Casey Jones turning his back on American football to play for the Boston Celtics. Casey Jones played at the University of San Francisco with Bill Russell, and Casey Jones, very versatile player, he was actually in the squad for the Los Angeles Rams, and he was going to be a defensive halfback. What happened was Casey Jones rang up Red Auerbach and said, I will come and play for the Celtics for $10,000. And Red just said, pack your bag. And Casey Jones didn't think he was going to do well in basketball because he was quite short. He wasn't a prolific scorer. But what he did bring was fast transition and great defense. And what happened was he went to the Celtics, and the Rams fully expected him to make the actual 35-man squad for the NFL season. So they put him on the reserve list for the following season. Casey Jones went on to do great things, winning 8 titles, having his 8 titles as a player, by the way, because he had a great coaching career as well. And he had his jersey retired by the Boston Celtics. I just found it really quite amazing that he had an opportunity in one sport and then chose to go down a different avenue. You can find out more about Casey Jones at the Casey Jones Foundation website. I'll put the link below. You can click there, read stories. It's managed by his family, and it's really interesting to read. So the next piece of information that I found out this week about the NBA, and it's not necessarily the NBA, it's the NCAA, but it had wider repercussions later for the NBA. Between 1967 and 1976, the NCAA banned slam dunking because of this one player. They said it gave an unfair advantage, and so they banned it because of this player. And this player was called Lou Alcindor, and if you didn't know, this is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He was too dominating, so he perfected a new shot, which was called a skyhook. And this is why it became really important, because Kareem used that in his arsenal within the NBA. However, what I found this week was in 1968, so when the ban was already in place, Spencer Haywood was playing college ball, and he had to go up and dunk to protect himself because he was going to get injured if he didn't dunk. Haywood was playing for College of Detroit, and this was 6.5 minutes from the end of the game. He went in, he slammed it, the backboard broke, and they decided to call the game. They just said, call it. It wasn't a close game. Haywood's team was winning 105-40. However, Haywood had to pay $300 to get the backboard fixed. Haywood was also having an absolutely stellar night. He scored 36 points and got 31 rebounds. So the third thing I learned this week was about the NBA creating the disaster draft in 1960. And the reason for this was that the Lakers, who were based in Minneapolis at the time, were playing the Rochester Royals, and they decided to get a plane home. Whilst the plane was flying, they hit a snowstorm. The plane suddenly dropped in altitude. They could see the house lights underneath out the windows. And then all of a sudden they landed in a cornfield. And the NBA realised that this could have been a really terrible situation, and that they had no structure of what to do if this had turned out to be the worst, and that an entire team had been wiped out. So they came up with the disaster draft. And essentially what the disaster draft is that if you lose the majority of your team, you have a draft, but every other NBA team can protect 5 of their best players. And then the team that has been affected by the disaster can pick any free agents in the other teams. So this means that you could get basically a team of 6 men. So 6-man kind of award winners could be in this team so that you could build and restart your franchise. I think it's highly interesting how this came about. I think the Lakers were very lucky. From reading the newspaper articles, the snow was really bad. Like the image of the plane in a cornfield just really highlights how lucky they were to come away unscathed. And it's interesting that this hadn't come up in the NBA's mind before, because I guess up until this point, air travel wasn't as commercial, and a lot of the teams would have taken a bus because it would save money, because not many teams were financially viable in the early days of the NBA. So I found this really interesting about how the NBA disaster draft started. So the fourth thing I learned was about Kareem's rookie season. So Kareem came into the league, and obviously he had been dominant in the NCAA. As I've already mentioned in his video, at this point in time of his career, he was known as Lou Alcindor, and the press said that he was going to become Lou Who because he's too soft. He's got to stop worrying about getting hit by knees and elbows. I found this really interesting. Obviously, as we know, the NBA was very physical in previous years. What I found interesting about it was that on the 31st of October 1971, the Bucks played the 76ers in Philadelphia, and there was a player called Daryl Imhoff who was an enforcer. He was quite an aggressive player, threw elbows, the lot. And that night, him and Kareem were going for a loose ball, and elbows were thrown. And there's this iconic picture that I found in the newspapers, and I can't believe it's not used more around the NBA. But Imhoff is laying flat on the ground, and Kareem's just walking off because he knows he's beaten the enforcer. And I find this really interesting because after the game, everyone's saying Kareem's now too tough. So a day before he was too soft and he's going to be forgotten in the NBA. Now he's too tough. And I think the press just were against Kareem. That's the only way I can explain it from my perspective. The swing in 48 hours is crazy. Obviously, Kareem was a very tough basketball player, won numerous NBA championships. I think dealing with these enforcers in his rookie years helped set up his later years in the NBA. So the final thing I learned this week, you may know, in 1971, the Milwaukee Bucks won the NBA championship, and the two stars from that team, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Oscar Robertson, then went on a 25-day tour of Africa, which was sponsored by the State Department. The premise of the whole tour was to spread the love of basketball to African nations. What I found really interesting, which I hadn't appreciated, was that this was all part of the Cold War, and hence why it was sponsored by the State Department. So what would happen was the USSR and the USA would send their sports teams on these tours to spread their sports across Africa. So they had a 25-day tour. Jabbar and Robertson enjoyed the tour. They said they were limited quite a lot in what they ate, but they said it was a fantastic experience and they really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed this video and finding out this information of what I've learned about the NBA historically this week. There'll be one every week, and if you like it, please make sure to subscribe.